Wow, it's wonderful to see so many people here, and welcome to English Language School at the Faculty of Extension. We are delighted to have Jane Willis with us this morning, and I think we're going to have a dynamic and very interesting, applicable workshop. Can everybody hear me in the back row? Awesome. Thanks, Rose. So I'm going to welcome Dr. Kay Fletcher, our Associate Dean and Acting Dean, while Katie Campbell is away, to just give us some introductory remarks. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the Dean this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional keepers of Treaty 6, where we gather today. So back away from the mic, right? I'm also pleased to introduce your facilitator for the workshop today. I did a little snooping and saw the conference you've just come from, some of you, Jane and others, and it looked amazing. Hope you made it back without snow. So Jane is an award-winning teacher and writer whose teacher development courses and books have inspired thousands of teachers around the world. She has long advocated for a task-based approach to teaching second languages, and her work has taken her to China, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, the Middle East, South America, and Europe. Very nice. Jane's prize-winning books include A Framework for Task-Based Learning, published by Longman, and with Courtney Edwards, Teachers Exploring Tasks in English Language Teaching, published by Palgrave and Macmillan. That book won a British Council Innovations Award. This is Jane's first trip to Edmonton, and we're delighted she's come to share her wisdom with us today. And so I'd like to welcome Jane to join me.
Right, so you've got to promise me one thing, that if I am off mic, you wave your hands around. Yeah? Good? Can you all hear the bell? Okay. In the second part, that's going to be important. When you hear the bell, it means you have to stop talking. I'm not going to give you a chance to talk during the first half. Okay, I've got three lots of people to thank. One is TESOL Canada for inviting me back to Canada. I was so pleased to be invited back. I had a lovely holiday here 28 years ago, and I have been back since then to Halifax for a TESOL, it must be 15 years ago, and it was even colder than it is here. That's one lot of people, and Chris Wharton was the prime mover in that, so thank you, Chris. I'd like to big thanks to Justine Light for setting everything up and all her team. She's done incredibly well. I was very difficult to get hold of because I've been swanning around the world and on holiday and stuff, but she's tracked me down and she's got me here. And I'd like to thank you for coming, because it's just wonderful to see so many faces. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And also, I've done a little bit of research this side of the room, and you've all brought texts to work with, which is brilliant. So thanks very much indeed. Okay, so this is going to be a quick 40-45 minute look at grammar. We're going to start with the what. Okay? What we're going to teach. And then the second half will be how we're going to get the grammar out of task-based learning. And it was originally planned as a 3-hour workshop, so your handout has actually got the first part, which I'm told that you're all really good at task-based teaching, so I'm not actually going to go through the first part of the handout with you. But that'll be for the second half. We'll focus more on getting the grammar out of it side. Okay. So, the picture is the Lake District, where I live. It's one of the lakes in the Lake District at evening. I just like the sky and the colours and the reflection in the water. And I just want you to think about when you teach, what have you observed when you teach grammar or focus on grammar? How soon are the results effective in the classroom? How soon do students take up what you've taught? And have you ever observed any of these observations? I'm making the assumptions that most of you will agree that these observations are pretty much true for you. So first of all, you can teach something, and then the next day, they don't seem to know it. Although actually they did know it when you taught it. It's like you teach present continuous, future, and you teach question forms, and they can all do them when you're teaching them, and they can do the exercises. But then they ask you, we go lab now, right? It doesn't have a straight, it's not a predictable outcome. So that is the same really. You know that they know about question forms, because you've taught them, they've learned them, but they haven't actually acquired them in their natural spontaneous discourse. Okay, then have you ever noticed this? Learners seem to pick up language that you haven't taught them. Oh gosh, that's good. Tick, in Imagine, and they've written something and you think, oh, that's really good. When they're doing their tasks, when they're talking to each other and really meaning what they say, they can create language to get their meanings across. And they create language that you haven't taught them, all kinds of things, but they do manage to get meanings across. Yeah? Would you agree with that? Have you observed that happening? And finally, instruction does seem to help, but quite how it helps, we're not quite sure. So what we're going to do in this first 40 minutes or so is look at different aspects of grammar. And this is on the first page of your handout. It's a summary of what I'm going to say, because it's actually quite challenging, this talk. It's not an easy one to understand, and you will take a bit of time to get your heads around it. So I've done you a summary. So we're going to look at 3 aspects of grammar, and we're going to look at what processes students use to acquire it, or not acquire it. Why don't they learn? So this, in fact, will answer some of the questions of why don't they seem to learn what we teach them. Second language acquisition research seems to take all grammar as monolithic. It's all the same. They don't divide it up. They don't divide it up into different aspects. So this talk is expanding. It's looking at different things about grammar. So first of all, we're going to start with grammar of structure. And we're going to look at some examples that students will recognize as being what they are. So recognition is a kind of process that goes through their heads when they see this thing. So for example, she working. You can correct them and they'll, oh yeah, okay, they'll recognize that she is working is the right form. They'll recognize that that's right, okay? The black cat rather than, you can explain and you can demonstrate how that works. Questions as well, you can explain, you can show them how they work, yeah? And they seem to go, oh yeah, okay, fine. This one as well. Right, you can demonstrate that that works. So that was the grammar of structure, the structure of a sentence. So we looked first of all at the structure of a verb phrase, and then we looked at the structure of a noun phrase, the cat black, the black cat. And noun phrases are the ones that really hold advanced learners back and intermediate learners back. There was a really good talk by Douglas Weber at TESOL Canada about that. So, grammar of orientation. Okay, what is the grammar of orientation? And this is quite different from structure. Structure is part of it. But if I give you this sentence, now, if you were at TESOL Canada, if you were at my keynote, just keep quiet for now. What do you understand by that? Do you know whose children they are? You could guess. Climb, okay. Mountain, which mountain? Year, is it next year? Is it going to be climbing, or have climbed, or were climbing, or whatever? Whose children? My children. So, the orientation is, are the words the grammar words that orient you in time and space and identity. Okay, so we'll have another look at that. We'll come back to this. This is just a quick run through. So, you know whose children, you know the identity of the children. When I could say, I'm going to tell you that our children climbed the mountain opposite Dame Edith Cavell 28 years ago, 28 and a half years ago, because it was in May. Alright, so you know which mountain, you know where, you know who. So all that grammar that does that, it's partly determiners and it's partly verb tense, verb patterns. It tells you, orients us in time and space. Okay, so this is another orientation thing. I'm just leaving work, I'll be home in an hour. So you know who, you know where they're going to be. Please be quiet, the children are sleeping. So present continuous tends to talk about something that's happening as you speak, which is actually not very common, interestingly. Present simple. Do you teach them contrastively? Is there a contrast? Most textbooks teach this for this and that for that, they contrast. He lives in London. And also something that happens again and again in the present, he plays football. So, with these, you can explain and you can demonstrate. But do students put it into operation? Do they use it? Can they handle it when they're actually using English in a meaningful way? Have they acquired it as a system? Okay, that's what you need to ask, or need to find out. And you notice very often they haven't. So we can contrast present simple, present continuous, but how useful is it to do that? Can you all see that? Because I don't especially want to read it out. Would you prefer me to read it out? Can anyone not see it? Hands up if you want me to read it out. Hands up if you're happy reading it. Okay. Okay. Advantages of the process of recognition then. The learning process of recognition. The advantages, the rules are simple and teachable. Students quite like it, having a rule. It's quite motivating to have a rule. And some aspects of grammar it can provide quite a good description of, like question forms and verb to be with ing and so on. But there are problems. So would you like to read what the problems are yourselves? Okay. In fact, not only does it not provide full coverage of grammar, it often narrows the mind, can confuse students a lot when they see another use of it. They don't understand and they're thinking, oh, it must be this. So, yeah, somebody was talking about learning and saying how their mind, once they know something, their minds are frozen, it freezes their minds. It doesn't lead to, how should I say, it doesn't lead to them thinking about it. They accept it uncritically, and then when they see the same form, they think it means the same thing. In fact, it may mean something quite different. So, the next slide should illustrate this problem a bit more. So these are more rules for present continuous. What about at 8 o'clock? We're usually having breakfast. It's a perfectly good sentence, isn't it? But we don't teach that use, do we? Because what do you do every day? I have breakfast at 8 o'clock. So why is it present continuous there? Why is it okay?
Because we're sure it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like the time is interrupted, isn't it? It's like interrupted present. We're usually having breakfast at 8 o'clock, at this point in time. So you've got, they were usually having breakfast at 8 o'clock. When I get home, the children are doing their homework. Another use is for something which we think is temporary. Okay? Fourth use. So there's all those different uses of the present continuous. So the rule that we give for present continuous, present simple, and we correct them on, is a gross oversimplification. And it closes students' minds to all these other uses that happen. And very often, if you get students to peer edit each other's work, they will correct these and they'll put them into present simple. Or they'll correct them, because they don't realise they're possible uses. I mean, correct them, not incorrectly correct them. You see what I mean? Okay. It would help if you could give students a more general rule to follow. So the concept of interruptedness would be a good concept. So you've got the interrupted past. This is a way of making grammar easier to learn and easier to understand. You've got the interrupted past, which we all teach, don't we? The classic example is, I was having a bath when the telephone rang. And the telephone rang when I was having a bath. Of course, these days you have your mobile phone beside you in the bathroom, so, I don't know. But it doesn't cause you to get out of the shower dripping wet and run to the phone. Well, it might do. But that's the classic example. But do we teach the other interrupted tenses? Look at these. So that's the one we just had. The interrupted future. When I get home, the children will be doing their homework. When I get back on Thursday evening, my family will be having a firework party, and they'll be watching fireworks. So you can have anything interrupted. You could have, at 8 o'clock, they might have been waiting for a call. You can have all kinds of things. So isn't it better to generalise uses and help them to build a system around the present simple, the present continuous, rather than just teach them a contrast? I'm not saying you should teach them all together, but during a task cycle or in the texts or whenever things crop up, let them see that this is another use of the present continuous. Until after the first year or so, you can then put them all together and say, hey, look at these, look out for them in text. Every time an example comes up in text, help them to see that that is the same. Okay. So, a framework for recycling then, from recognition to system building. So I was saying, look, there is a system for using this, helping students understand the systems. They can much more likely to listen out for new language and to put it to use. So, individual verb forms, aspect, talking about the past, present, future. So we're looking at present continuous, past continuous, future continuous, and all the other continuouses. So they recognize, if they can recognize them in text, and then we develop a teaching technique where they explore text and find examples in the text, then they'll get a much broader view of grammar. So we've added here recognition, and we've added system building as learning processes. And it works also with prepositions, not just verbs. So prepositions, in, on, at, for. So let's have a look. What are the meanings of the prepositions? The prepositions are really easy because nearly always in the text there will be some prepositions for place, location. There'll be prepositions in time phrases, in expressions of time. And there'll be prepositions that don't fit either of those, but you can always go through a text and there'll always be prepositions in time phrases. There'll always be prepositions in location phrases. And then what about the other prepositions that are in there? And you can build up your phrasal verbs and your other uses of prepositions. And we'll go on into pattern grammar in a minute. So, verb patterns. So verb patterns like give up, give over, give out. All these prepositions used with verbs. Are there patterns with those? We'll look at those later. So you can recognize prepositions, and they can start building systems of the meanings of prepositions. Okay? So this is an example for how long, time and distance. So how long for? Another use of for, reason. What for? Who wants or needs? Can you do it for me? So if you see the preposition for, they need to know that it has different meanings. So we've got form, meaning and use, and how we use those different meanings. So let's have a look. So here are some verb patterns. So this is another kind of grammar. This is called pattern grammar. So we've got grammar of structure, grammar of orientation, and pattern grammar. And we're on to now pattern grammar, right? And there's there is a reason, there is a reason for these patterns. And if you look at the meanings of the prepositions, the possible meanings of the prepositions, they give you some indication. So with distance, it stretched for miles. I was in South Africa last Christmas, and I could say the desert stretched for miles ahead of me as we drove down the road. Okay? Reason. All these verbs, you can ask for something, you can argue for something, you can look for something, hunt, search, shop for something. There are all these kind of searching, looking for words. And if you get one or two of these examples in a text, or in an interview, in a listening transcript, then you can ask them, what other verbs go with for, in this sense, in this meaning? So they're building up a system. They're recognizing that these verbs are followed by for. Which for? Okay, so this is looking for. So if they don't know the word volunteer, they can got a better way of guessing what preposition goes after it. So then the last one, who wants needs? All these verbs, he substituted something for, he stood in for him, he spoke on his behalf. It's on his behalf, on whose behalf? So there's a whole group of verbs that work like that. And any dictionary, a good corpus dictionary, will actually give these examples. So what you're doing, you're helping learners build systems and see a kind of broader pattern. So, advantages of system building. I'm going to let you read that. So there's always a reason for a particular grammatical structure. So you can choose what you want to mean, and you can choose the words and the phrases that are appropriate for that meaning. Powerful generalizations we've talked about. A framework for recycling. If it comes up in a text today, you could go back and you could look at other texts. Have they had examples of those in previous texts? Ideally, all the texts your students read, how many of you have heard of corpus linguistics? It's really good if you can get your text electronically, and as they read a new text, put it into the text bank. And then if you want some more examples of for, you can just look them up really quickly, and you can do a little exercise on for, using examples that they've already read from the text bank that they're used to. So that's one thing that you can do, and it's really useful for students to have that as a resource. And if they want to look at another meaning of in, you can collect them really, really quickly if you've got them electronically. The last one, continue learning independently. Once you've called their attention to these things, they'll notice them, start noticing the things they hear and read for themselves, and that's really important. Okay, but there are problems with system building too. It doesn't explain why people make the choices they do, and some systems defy explanation because they're too subtle and too complex. And even though you've pointed them out, students still don't seem to use it. So why is this? So far we've looked at these learning processes. And what we're going to go on to now is exploration. And we're going to look, in the end, how task-based learning, as the focus on for, how we can encourage exploration, which will lead to system building. But of course, students have to be able to recognize particular things. So they all come into play together. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a task, and I want you to think. It's talking about holiday plans, and I'm going to tell you that I've just had a week's holiday in Canada before I came to do this, to talk at the TESOL conference. So I would ask you, if this was a task, the target task is, what I'm thinking that you're going to be able to do is, in your groups, you're going to find out, in groups of about 4 or 5, you're going to find out what travel plans or what holiday plans or what plans for Christmas or whatever your fellow students have. That would be the target task, talking about their plans for the future. They would need to be able to ask each other and do a survey and find out who in the class is doing what are the most popular things, where are the most popular places, and so on. So the end result would be a class survey, but the target task would be that they've got to do this finding out. So I would ask them to write down 4 questions to ask me. So do you want to ask me a question about my holiday in Canada? Can you think of some questions to ask me? Just shout them out.
Where did you go?
So where did I go?
What did you do?
What I did there, what did I do? Yep.
Where did you go?
Who did I go with?
Where did you stay?
Where did I stay? All right, then probably some more questions, but I'm going to tell you that I went to Kelowna and I stayed in the home of one of my longest friends. Her name is Nezida. She's French speaking. She married a French man and they came across to Canada 40 years ago. And I had visited them in Canada 28 years ago. We actually took their children to the Calgary Stampede with my children, and they had a great time. And so I went to Kelowna to stay with them, and we did quite a lot of walking. We did a bit of sightseeing. We went to some vineyards and some orchards, and we took their dog for walks. Hands up if you haven't had your question answered. What was your question? Did I enjoy it? What do you think? I did. That's a very nice question. Thank you. Okay, so that would be a kind of start of the task. I would probably get the learners to write down their questions before I did that. That would be a kind of introduction task, what you would do right at the very beginning. Okay, and then just to help them do their own tasks better, I would play them a recording of my friend Janet, who's, I recorded this. This is a spontaneous recording made. I asked someone to ask, I told somebody that Janet was planning a trip to Africa, and I said nothing about it. So, okay, so what we've just done is a pre-task one with asking the questions. I haven't put it on there. So we've done a pre-task bit. Right, you know, you were preparing to do the task, and I'm going to play you the recording of Janet's plans. The task cycle would be task planning report. We'll go into that on the next session after the break, after our in the second part of the workshop. And then there would be a focus on form. So I haven't done a focus on form, have you noticed? We're going to go straight into the listening now. Okay, so this would be the lesson plan. Is that all right? So the listening task was what we're going to be doing now. So here's the task, the text of the listening task. So what I'd like you to do is read it, and your students will just be hearing it, and what I would ask them to do is put their hands up each time one of their questions is answered. So remember what your questions were. How many of your questions were answered with that? Remember, they'll have their questions written down in front of them, a list of 5 questions or something. I should have brought the tape. I'm sorry, I didn't. I should have brought the actual recording for you to hear. But that is the transcript of a spontaneous, exploratory task. She didn't know she was going to be asked that. They were just all talking about travel plans in general. So, So what if you were going to plan a focus on form for the end of the task cycle, and I wouldn't do this at the beginning, I would just let them hear it so they know, it's kind of like a task rehearsal for them, so they know roughly how to do the task, the kind of things they might talk about. Or you might decide to play the recording after they've done the task. It's entirely flexible. After they've done the, depending on your learners, how good they are, they may want both. And they probably want to hear it about 3 or 4 times. But for a focus on form, bearing in mind that what we're working at now is not the grammar of repetition, but we're looking at, not the process of we're focusing on the processes. Will they recognize things in there? Will they get a broader picture of the system of the ways of expressing the future in English, talking about plans. And what else could they get from that text? So now we're into exploration. Okay? So what could you focus on there? This is like the beginning of a workshop thing now. What would you focus on with your learners from that text? Somebody yesterday, I did the same text in Calgary, someone said, oh, going to future. And I thought, no, not just going to future, because there is no future tense in English. There's only ways of expressing the future. And we have so many different ways of expressing the future. It's quite amazing, really. I'm just going to come and stand over here so that people who are there, people in that corner, why don't you come and sit in the front? You can see one of those there. Yeah? Okay, when we move afterwards. So you can come now if you want. How many ways are there of expressing the future? There's a lot, aren't there? What other things strike you about that text? It's spontaneous spoken. What other things might your students find interesting about it? Sorry?
Sometimes ungrammatical.
That's an interesting, sometimes ungrammatical, he said. Okay, spoken grammar is different from written grammar. If you're viewing spontaneous spoken, that's a really good answer, thank you, because that's exactly what I wanted to say and you brought it up really well. So, spoken grammar is different. We don't have to put subjects on verbs. Okay? Going walking. Going in September. We miss off subjects when we're speaking, and it's perfectly okay to do that. We do not speak in sentences. Sentences are for writing. Sentences are units of written language. Spoken language, we speak in meaning units, in units of meaning. Sense units, meaning units. And the intonation of each meaning unit is a whole. So, what other things are there? What other things might you pick out of there? You could look at time phrases, couldn't you? There's quite a lot of time phrases there. They might be useful for your students. And you might want to look at the structure of the time phrases. So time, that's orientation, the grammar of orientation. And then you might want to classify them according to the structure of the phrases. When I did this with students, they gave me time phrases. They said, do a bit of travelling. And they saw that as a time phrase. And I thought, well, yes, actually, it is. They're not going to spend all their time travelling. They're going to spend a bit of their time travelling. And I thought that's really good that they've understood that. And they've not had that. Do a bit of travelling and then a bit of something else. It's so common in spoken English. There's a whole lot of phrases there that are common in spoken, but not in written. And students, when students get used to working with spontaneous, exploratory text, they are so relieved that they don't have to speak in sentences. Because speaking in whole sentences is incredibly difficult. And to do that, it takes planning. Now I'm trying to speak in whole sentences now because I'm lecturing and it's public. And I'm being recorded, so it's really public. Okay? But when you're speaking spontaneously, you don't have time to make sentences. You use a lot of chunks. You use a lot of ready-made chunks. So are there any ready-made chunks there? Chunks that you don't have to think about creating? I mean, doing a bit of is a chunk, isn't it? You don't think about a bit of, you just say it. For a few days, for a few weeks, there's a chunks which happen for a few years, or for a few minutes. Okay, so all these are little lexical chunks that are either fixed or or you can change something in them. Okay, so let's go on then. So there's your future, all the expressions of the future, which you would probably ask students to underline all the phrases of the future, all the expressions of future time. And then you might ask them to classify them. So there's all the ing ones, expressing a future with an ing verb. You could ask them to collect all those. And then you can do this. I hope you've read them well. Can you do this? It's progressive deletion. Can someone read the first sentence? Yeah, good. You're planning. So the stars are for letters, right? I hear you're planning a trip for Africa. So you can start them off and say, okay, read it again and make sure that you can do this. Go back and read it again. Reiteration, using the text for form focus, going back over it, different ways for different things at different times. So I'm not going to put you all the way through that, but you see what it's doing. They're going to and then you can do another one where there's even more words until in the end there's only about 2 words in each sentence left. And it's very funny and it's a great thing to do in class, and it really does help them to see, to build up the structure of phrases, ways of expressing the future, and it also gets them into understanding the system of the future in English, which is very different from other languages. Okay, so you're working, recognition, exploring future, and then looking at the structure of those. Okay. So, and because in the end you've got, for a few days, you could hang for a few days, what else can we say, for a few years, for a few months. We can look at for, and then tell them that these are the most common uses of for, and then you can go back to the text that you've had earlier in your lessons with the group, and you can collect examples with for and ask them to allot to categories. So categorization, that's building up patterns. Okay, so why do we need to encourage exploration? It also, the last thing there, the last thing which I wanted to put there, it encourages them to explore text that they don't do in class, to explore text they see around them, to explore other things, yeah? Okay, so let's look at those assumptions at the beginning that we talked about. So that's to go back to the beginning of this talk. Learners create language to meet their needs. In fact, the most powerful resource for learning is the natural capacity of the learners to solve problems and create their own language. Prabhu, who was one of the first people to use task-based learning back in the 1970s, late 1970s, he said students have got to grapple with understanding and strive to express meanings, and create their own ways of meaning. If they haven't, they use language to create their own ways of meaning. And they pick up language they haven't been taught, especially if you've got text and transcripts for them to look at. Then they're going to acquire from those. They'll all be learning different things from that, from those travel plans to Africa. They'll be picking up different things. We need to give learners space and time and encouragement to do this. Okay, so you're not just teaching grammar, but you are letting them acquire. So we can help learners with the simple things like recognition and introduce them to more complex grammar, in the way that I went through present continuous uses with you, gradually introduce them to more complex things, as a means to help them explore the language and discover for themselves the real complexities of grammar as a meaning system. You cannot possibly teach all the patterns. Think of all those verbs with for, think of all the verbs with give. You cannot possibly teach all those up front, but you can help them explore texts and go away thinking, oh yeah, I've got these, I must look out for now in text and see where that, see which kind of for it is. So task-based learning is a good way to do this. So that was the end of the first half of my, not quite a half because we've got a bit more time afterwards. I'm going to hand you over now to Justine to tell you what's happening next. But I'd like you to just think about that as you're fulfilling the next part of the seminar time. But I would like to point out that if you're interested in the different types of grammar and how to teach them the activities that go with them, my late husband's book, Rules, Patterns and Words, if you're interested in grammar and letters in English language teaching, that's quite a good one to read because he goes into the 3 kinds of grammar in much more detail and with exercises on how to use them.